Hello, my people. If you don't know me, allow me to introduce myself. My name is Daddy Doyen, also known as the Demonatrix. I am a non-binary trans masc pro-dominatrix. I prefer the term femdom and fine dom. I am the founder of the Kinky Cafe LLC, a queer BDSM social club and event business. I create spaces, education, and support for queer kinky folks. Sometimes when I speak about BDSM and kink, not only am I told, ain't that white people shit, but I get strange looks when I say that there is a connection between healing trauma, self-mastery, and BDSM and kink. First of all, let's talk about the difference between BDSM and kink. You don't have to practice BDSM in order to practice or enjoy kink. Kink is often a sexual act that is considered outside of the norm of sexual activity. Things like pulling hair, choking, spitting, and restraints are all kinky. BDSM is a set of protocol related to power exchange. Now, what exactly is trauma? What causes trauma? Usually an event that causes long-term negative effects on mental and emotional health. There are also many types of trauma, such as physical, mental, emotional, inherited, and generational. When I say the conscious practice of BDSM, or the intertwining of BDSM and spiritual practice, can be utilized to heal trauma, especially in Black folks and queer folks, I'm speaking on all of these traumas. But let's talk about inherited and generational, shall we? First of all, disclaimer, kink and BDSM are in no way a replacement for therapy or psychological assistance. If you need to be medicated for a serious mental illness or disability, please do so. Therapy is also a very valuable tool in the conscious practice of BDSM. Inherited, generational, or intergenerational trauma is trauma that is passed down from generation to generation. Of course, where this applies in the Black community is distrust of the law and being on alert or on edge around white folks, and more. If you look into indigenous populations, there's a lot of similar trauma there. What about queer folks? When it comes to queer folks, yes, even white queer folks, the trauma tends to center around their sexuality or gender identity. When someone is born queer, it is very likely that they are not the first queer person born in their family history. Let's say maybe they're Jewish and their gay or trans relatives were killed in a concentration camp. Or maybe you were born to a Catholic family, and because of your great-grandmother's struggle with her own sexuality and not wanting to be found out, she then took it out on every queer person born into her family from her on. Trauma can be passed down through our blood. Daddy, I still don't get it. How are whips, chains, and cuffs gonna help me with this trauma cycle? I'm getting to that, babe. I promise. Intentional or conscious BDSM is BDSM practiced with your spiritual, mental, and emotional health in mind. Practicing the principles of BDSM with this in mind gives you a non-clinical pathway to discovering self-awareness, self-mastery, and shadow confrontation and integration. Daddy, what the hell does that mean? Okay. Let me give you an example. Many of us Black folks have a problem with being whipped, flogged, etc. for obvious reasons. The roots of a lot of acts in BDSM being rooted in racism and slavery is a discussion for another video. But I was one of those people. I still will not allow anyone to hit me with a belt. That's a personal limit of mine. When I started my journey in BDSM, I was a sub to a white dom. He never hit me with belts or with floggers or anything like that because that was a limit of mine. He did spank me with bare hands, spatulas, or other instruments. Now in old guard BDSM, it was customary to be a submissive for at least a year before you became a dominant. Partly to understand the mindset and feelings of a submissive, but also to understand the implements used in BDSM. So as a rule, I still test all of my toys and implements on myself before I introduce them to a submissive or bottom. After my experience as a sub, I was still curious about flogging, whipping, etc. So what did I do? I learned to flog myself. Now you would think that that sounds like some form of self-punishment because it is literally self-flagellation. But I learned that certain flogging patterns can not only create rhythms that can be meditative, but somatic as well. My practice in self-flagellation has been such a release for me. Not only does it put the control in my hands, but the act, when combined with mindfulness and body movement, releases so much trauma and tension in the body. This practice also allowed me to let my guard down and understand who to trust when it comes to others flogging me when I decide to bottom. Let's take another example. Rope. Rope can be very traumatic for Black people as well, for obvious reasons. Something in our DNA says that is danger. Now, I myself am not a rope bunny, but from what I've learned from my Black friends who are into shibari and rope suspension, this too, the pressure of the ropes, the feeling of compression as you're floating in the air, provides a lot of somatic healing benefits as well. Well, overall, the practice of both dominance and submission amongst queer folks redefines the relationship to empowerment, bodily autonomy, and especially shame. My submissives are trained using conscious BDSM. When they come under my wing, my intention is to see growth, healing, and spiritual expansion in them, no matter what race, age, or gender identity. I teach discipline not only in traditional practices like submissive poses and subservient tasks, but daily practices and discipline, like making sure they start their day by making their bed with meditations and affirmation. And I always make sure that they are taking care of their bodies and minds before anything else. Alongside the typical practices of power exchange, I teach them how to be their own master, their own driving force for self-love and spiritual growth. Maybe it sounds a little woo-woo to some, but the root of a healthy kink life and non-toxic BDSM practice is a foundation of clear and healthy communication, spiritual and mental hygiene, and the ability to let go of shame and fear. We sometimes don't realize how important this foundation is, and that causes a lot of discord in the kink community, especially around toxic people entering the kink community with no knowledge of safety and an unhealthy idea of what power exchange is. That goes for submissives and switches just as much as it goes for dominance. I believe that with the guidance of kink educators who have a knowledge of TIC or trauma-informed consensual kink, shout out to Coach Feline, and those who practice conscious and intentional BDSM, we can not only see a much healthier and safer kink community, but those of us with inherited or generational traumas can discover a way to break trauma cycles and generational curses in a way that helps us to reclaim our bodies, our sexuality, and our spirits. Take advantage of all the knowledge that you can absorb from kink educators, because kink education is harm reduction. Want more guidance? Join us on the Kinky Cafe Patreon at patreon.com/Kinky Cafe Society. Your membership allows the Kinky Cafe to create and offer more events, classes, and workshops, as well as gives you access to exclusive content by myself, such as Daddy's Love Notes, tips for discipline and growth in your everyday life, and much, much more to come, premiering this year.